Hi guys, it's Misha and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about trigger warnings and how they're harmful to trauma survivors and actually pose a threat to academic freedom. I even have an emotional support animal with me here. This is Vanya. So the purpose of these trigger warnings, according to these woke college professors, is to create a safe space for the students and to warn them about the material to avoid reminding them of any past trauma. And I didn't start to see trigger warnings being used until later on in high school, and then in almost all of my classes in university. They were all over the place. And speaking from experience, these trigger warnings really do limit the discussion and what the professor is able to teach. Everyone is walking on eggshells and is too afraid to ask the questions that they want to ask, because what if that's the wrong question? What if that offends somebody? So it already creates a weird environment where no one really wants to say anything, and it really does make students appear very fragile. And this is especially funny to me, someone that grew up with, fairy tales that never came with a trigger warning. I'm sure other Russian people or German people, because German fairy tales are also very dark.
There once was a boy who liked to suck his thumbs. His mother asked him to stop, but he wouldn't. So she cut off his thumbs. Now he has no thumbs. Good night.
Can relate, because when your mom's reading you a fairy tale, she doesn't give you a trigger warning, Baba Yaga's about to boil a kid. That trigger warning would have taken away the element of surprise, kind of like a spoiler. So that's why it doesn't work. And in the classroom now, you have to avoid topics that could be upsetting, and then professors avoid teaching it, obviously. But how can you avoid talking about violence, especially in a history class, for example? You have to learn about disturbing things such as the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide. These are all very important things we have to learn and have to discuss, even if they are obviously very upsetting. Can you imagine a president asking for a trigger warning before looking at what's going on in a war? You have to see it also, because that elicits that emotional response, right? That you wouldn't get necessarily if someone just told you about what's going on rather than you looking at it at a documentary or something like that. And I think it's one thing for a professor to write in their syllabus, this is what we're going to be discussing, or kind of tell kids this movie or this documentary has a lot of gore. But these trigger warnings are not just used in those cases. They're used when there's a bad word, or when there's a drop of blood in this movie that we're going to watch for 3 seconds, or, a slur or something like that. It's everywhere. Everything has a trigger warning.
Bible, Shakespeare, they're given trigger warnings, but I saw you wrote the U.S. Constitution. What do you trigger in that?
There are trigger warnings for the U.S. Constitution now. We've seen trigger warnings for American flags because it evokes patriotic imagery and it may be hurtful to people that aren't of American descent.
Students are given the option to just leave class. You don't have to learn about it if it could offend you. I mean, that's ridiculous. It is so ridiculous. You are going into university, accept the fact that you may be uncomfortable sometimes. That's part of being an adult, right? And if you can't handle that, I mean, what, you're gonna have to sit in your room all day long, because life, the real world, is not a safe space, right? This is a fantasy that we're creating in the classroom. The only other place you'll find this is probably TikTok or other social media apps where they put trigger warnings everywhere. I don't know if you've seen, it's like TW. You need to be able to talk about serious issues as a college student, and that may mean getting offended or getting a little bit triggered. That's just part of it. That's life. If you have some severe trauma that you need to work through, go to therapy. There's no shame in that. I know not everyone can, but if that is an option, go to therapy. A lot of universities have counseling, but it should not be the professor's responsibility if you have a panic attack every time you see the color red. It's these schools that are afraid to get sued, and then the rest of us have to walk on eggshells and be afraid of saying the wrong thing and this and that, and then treating everyone as a child. We are actual adults in college. And the funny part is, this doesn't even help those who have experienced trauma. By starting off class by saying, hey, what we're about to watch or what we're about to read might emotionally traumatize you, who do you think that's helping? Those people are already prepared to be triggered. And there was even a Harvard study, right, where they looked at trauma survivors and these trigger warnings. And what they found is that they are actually counter-therapeutic, and that they hold them back from recovery, from getting better. And this is so obvious. If you know anything about trauma, if you tell everyone around you, hey, don't say this word or don't do this because this is a trigger for me. It gives that trigger and that trauma so much power.
When you have a little kid who goes to the doctor and he's about to get a shot and the doctor is like prepping him, saying this is going to be horrible, prepare yourself, nurse, hold him down, the kid's going to freak out and they're going to say, oh my gosh, this is going to hurt so bad. Whereas opposed to the doctor would just treat the kid like an adult and say, hey, we're just going to give you a quick shot. There you go. The kid realizes, hey, it wasn't that bad. It's like that with trigger warnings. When you tell someone this is going to offend you, people look for any opportunity they can to be offended. They're going to act like they have PTSD over reading some hurtful words.
Your trauma is an essential part of who you are, and it's your identity. How are you expected to move on from that? It's about 3.5% of the US population that has PTSD. But if we're just talking about trauma, a lot of us have trauma, not PTSD, but just trauma, right? And so a lot of things can make us uncomfortable. That's life. There's even something called exposure therapy, which is great, especially for people who have phobias, because then you can be exposed to certain sounds or smells or whatever, colors that can trigger you. It's a potential trigger, and become, used to it and to move on and to heal. More and more teachers are implementing these trigger warnings to be politically correct, and it's just so unfortunate. We're allowing students to have this utopian view of the world where nothing upsetting ever happens, which just isn't reality, not preparing students for real life. And that's all for today's video, guys. Please comment down below your thoughts on trigger warnings, and remember to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.